Disabled war veteran Jake Sully has settled into a routine life in the United States. It seems as though all he does is wallow in self-pity, pick fights in bars, and ruminate on his ill-fated past, remembering the good old days with fondness. But he had no idea that everything was about to change. Some officials approach him one day and break the news that his twin brother Tom was recently murdered. Jake is heartbroken, but the government wants to hire him to finish his brother's unfinished project. It seems that Tom had intended to visit Pandora, a recently discovered planet that appears to support life similar to that on Earth. After giving the offer some thought, Jake finally agrees when the officials tell him he will be paid millions. After that, he'll be cryogenically frozen for 6 years to get ready for the trip. When he comes to, he's aboard a ship headed for Pandora with a number of other people. Since Jake and his sibling are a perfect genetic match, he was given the opportunity of a lifetime. Next, Jake and the rest of the crew board a shuttle to Pandora. Since the atmosphere of the planet is too toxic for humans to survive, everyone is required to wear full-face respirators. Just 20 seconds of exposure will result in death within 4 minutes. When Jake first arrives on the mysterious planet, he heads straight to a military briefing where Colonel Miles Quaritch is addressing the assembled troops and a few civilians who have come along for the ride. He explains that the natives of Pandora are called Na'vi, and that if they want to stay alive, they must follow the rules. In a later scene, Jake meets Norm Spellman, a biologist, at a lab. She shows him a simulation of himself created by the computer for the first time. Then it's revealed that humans can pass for novice on Pandora if they link up with their avatars, each of which is a human Na'vi hybrid created through genetic engineering. As Jake and Norm enter the science department, the program's science lead, Dr. Grace Augustine, awakens in a pod designed to link her with her avatar. While Norm is attempting to introduce her to Jake, she suddenly becomes hostile and leaves the room. Parker Selfridge, who represents the Resources Development Administration, REDA, is the next person Grace confronts after arriving at the base. REDA is a business in charge of the colony's military and civilian staff. As she tries to persuade Parker, she brings up the fact that Jake has no legs and isn't a scientist to back up her claim that he is of no use. Jake, however, is the only person who shares his brother Tom's genes, which Park argues is crucial for activating his avatar. The following morning, back in the lab, Jake and Norm are linked to their avatars. Jake's virtual self wakes up soon after in a private space. He has the unexpected ability to use his legs again and walk around, something he hasn't done in years. He disregards his doctor's orders and sprints to the recreation area, where a number of other avatars are engaged in sports and generally having a good time. Once Jake's avatar goes to sleep, the connection is severed and he returns to his human form. After that, he talks to the Colonel. Jake presses the Colonel for clarification on their true mission on this planet, and the latter gives him the lowdown. Unobtainium, a rare rock supposedly stored on Pandora, is worth billions on Earth. The Na'vi people's home community is where the highest quality and largest unobtainium rocks can be found. Jake must persuade them to leave because they cannot bear to watch their land be colonized by humans. The Colonel tells Jake that he has 3 months to convince the Na'vi people to leave their home planet. Jake will receive new legs if the mission is a success. If the Na'vi still refuse to relocate after 3 months, a military force will be sent in and they will almost certainly be wiped out. The following day, Jake links up with his avatar and soars over Pandora's surface with Grace, Norm, and the rest of the crew. They'll soon touch down in a location where they'll start taking plant specimens for study. Jake, however, is so unfamiliar with his new environment that he gets lost and ends up in a flower field. A thanator, an unusual animal that resembles a panther, suddenly appears from behind and chases Jake, leaving him alone. The Thanator is roaring down on him, but he manages to escape by diving into a waterfall. His crew spends a while searching for Jake, but as night falls, they give up and head home. Jake, armed only with a dull stick after losing everything else, can be spotted at night preparing his spear. In the meantime, a female Na'vi is hovering above him, watching him. She raises her bow to shoot him, but something strange and luminous alights on it, causing her to pause. Jake is also under attack from a pack of viper wolves. Now, when all hope seems lost, a female Na'vi unexpectedly comes to his rescue, driving off the pack of wolves that have been chasing him. Jake, however, has earned her disapproval, so she has ordered him to resume his proper position. After getting ready to leave, Jake begins to follow her. He also wants her to instruct him in the art of survival. The Na'vi initially rejects Jake's request for assistance. but eventually relents after several of the mysterious glowing entities from earlier land on his body and invite him to Omatakean. Her name is Natiri, and she uses it to introduce herself. Once they get there, though, the Navi turn on the visitor. Tsusude, Natiri's fiancé and the heir apparent, is one of those who is eager to see the hybrid human put to death. Natiri, however, interrupts and takes Jake to meet her parents, the tribal leaders. Jake tells them he is a fighter and wants to learn more about their culture and customs. Queen pricks his chest and licks his blood at this news. She concludes that he has a good heart and begs Natiri to teach him and guide him. Following the ceremony, Jake is placed inside his bed, which wraps around him like a cocoon. Once human Jake has fallen asleep in the chamber, he will be resurrected there. At work the next day, he tells Grace and the rest of the scientists about his surreal experience. However, the Colonel stresses once again that he has only 3 months to complete his task. The next scene features Jake, a human, recording a video diary of his daily exploits. He explains that his avatar is currently in Natiri's training facility. Someday, she'll have him pick out a scown, a peculiar animal to use as a mount. After some convincing, he settles on one and links his neural cue to its antenna. After that, he gets the hang of riding the scown and even starts to enjoy it once he figures out how to control it. The human Jake later fills in the Colonel and Parker on the unobtainium deposit beneath the massive hama tree, the Navi's home. Jake wants to negotiate with the Navi and convince them to leave, but the Colonel sees this as an opportunity to destroy the tree. Grace, upon discovering Jake's manipulation, sends him to the Hallelujah Mountains, a remote region containing enormous floating islands revered by the Navi. As it turns out, she is only interested in learning more about Pandora and has no intention of ever mining for unobtainium there. A Toruk, a brightly colored flying mountain monster that despises anything that can fly, unexpectedly follows Jake and Natiri as they scone through the sky one day. Luckily, they make it to the home tree, where Natiri exhibits the Toruk's ruins to Jake. Her great-grandfather, she says, rode a Toruk to unite the 5 Navi tribes during a difficult time, making him the last person to do so. Natiri elaborates by saying that nobody has dared to mount a Toruk in decades. After a few weeks, the Navi tribe begins to welcome Jake as one of their own, and they even throw a ceremony in his honor. After the ritual, Natiri leads him to a prayer space, where the two of them commune with a tree by means of the nerve endings at the tips of their long hair. Natiri tells him he can choose any woman he wants to marry. After some consideration, Jake finally tells her he wants to marry her. A stunned Natiri accepts the proposal, and the pair share a passionate kiss. Jake eventually comes to in the lab after spending the night out, and the new couple spends the night together under the tree. Early that morning, Natiri hears trees crashing and sees several bulldozers tearing the area apart. As soon as she realizes they are under attack, she makes it her top priority to drag Jake to safety. At their hidden location, Jake is about to link with his avatar. When he comes to, he attempts to halt the bulldozers by climbing atop one. After trying everything else, he destroys the camera system, prompting the soldiers to open fire. Thankfully, Jake is able to get away and make it back to the home tree. When they return to the base, the Colonel reviews the surveillance footage and realizes that Jake was the avatar who tried to sabotage their operation. The bulldozers keep working, destroying the Omatakea's sacred place, and he storms into the room, looking for Jake and Grace. At the same time, the Navis are gathering under the Homa tree with the intention of fighting off the invaders. Both Jake and Grace are against this and try to stop it from happening. Despite Jake's betrothal to Natiri, the warrior Suste tries to kill him because he knows they are a lifelong couple. As tensions rise, the Colonel cuts off communication between the avatars and their human forms, knocking Grace's and Jake's virtual selves unconscious. Next, an enraged Grace confronts the Arday and military leaders, telling them that the Navi have access to a network built out of Pandora's trees with more neurological connections than the human brain. Together, she and Jake declare that the navies will remain permanently rooted in the Homa tree. The Colonel, upon hearing this, decides to launch a full-scale invasion of the Homa tree, complete with gas bombs to scare away the navists. When Jake learns that the Navis are planning to leave the base, he becomes alarmed and begs Base Commander Parker to let him use his avatar to persuade them to leave. After agreeing, Parker warns Jake that he has only an hour to complete the task. Returning to the navies, he reveals to them that they are under attack from humans and tells them that he is also human. Jake is pushed by Natiri for betraying her trust after she hears this. The other navists are just as shaken up, so they decide to kidnap Jake and Grace. They then get ready to battle the human invaders, who have arrived in a fleet of airships. Afterwards, hostilities start. The Navis do their best, but they can't compete with the humans' heavy artillery with just bows and arrows. Several navies perish as the Hometry is brought crashing down after a series of explosions. The Queen returns to the captive humans and unexpectedly frees them during the chaos. Then she pleads with them to help her people. Jake rushes over to Neytiri and tries to comfort her, but his efforts are in vain. When Neytiri's father is fatally injured in the attack, the bad colonel, however, picks them up along the way and fires at the spaceship. Grace has been badly hurt and is probably going to die of blood loss. Finally reaching the floating mountains, Jake hops inside a pod to become his digital self. After realizing that the Navis won't accept him, he makes the bold decision to use his skill to find the Toruk on his own. Although straightforward, his plan could very well be his undoing. Jake then cautiously descends on the Toruk from above, climbing onto its back. Then we see him riding the Toruk to the Tree of Souls during a ritual performed by the Quarians. After being shocked by this news, the Navis finally greet him with the utmost respect upon his return. Then, Jake enlists the help of the warrior Tsute in his fight against the human army. Jake, now accompanied by the Navis, tries to revive his dying friend Grace and even asks the Queen for assistance. Grace, despite their best efforts, dies of her wounds. Jake's rage is stoked by this, and he rallies the Navis to drive off the humans. By day's end, they've made contact with the other clans and rounded up another couple thousand Navis. At the same time, the colonel has picked up on the hordes of Navis, and his focus has shifted to the Tree of Souls. So he gives the order to advance, and his men do so. The Navis, however, appear on the ground and in the air, much to his astonishment. While Tsute and the other warriors are prepared to lay down their lives for their land, Jake is soaring above it on his legendary Toruk. Quickly, a bloody battle breaks out, with casualties on both sides. Unfortunately, this time the Scounds are the cause of the human artillery's gradual decline in effectiveness. Jake is being chased and shot at by the Colonel's Dragonfly ship at this time. Thanks to Trudy's timely arrival, the Colonel is distracted long enough for Jake to make a break for it. However, Tsute is killed in an explosion and shot down. Neytiri's Scound is shot down. Neytiri, standing on the ground, takes stock of the destruction and immediately begins to worry. Meanwhile, a massive bomber is closing in on the Tree of Souls. It looks like the humans are going to win, but out of the remnants of the forest comes a squadron of Titanotheres, Pandora's heavily armored dinosaur, like animals, and they attack the soldiers. Neytiri, filled with joy at having so many of Pandora's species at her back, enthusiastically returns to the fray. When a Thanator appears close by, it, shockingly, genuflects to her in submission. Meanwhile, military ground forces disperse in disarray, and Jake raises his Toruk into the air to confront the bomber. He then proceeds to launch grenades at the ship, causing it to crash far from the Tree of Souls. Meanwhile, Jake fires explosives at the Colonel's spaceship, which the latter manages to escape from wearing an amp suit. The Colonel, alas, tracks down Grace's impromptu camp and finds himself there. Attempting to shut down Jake's avatar pod, he is attacked by the Thanator Neytiri had linked with. Surprisingly, he is able to kill it with his suite, but in doing so, he accidentally ensnares Neytiri. But before the Colonel can kill her, Jake shows up in his avatar and stops the plot. The two then engage in a back and forth, with the Colonel ultimately emerging victorious. Immediately before he can finish off Jake, Neytiri stands up and arrows the Colonel in the chest with an arrow. She wastes no time before unleashing a second arrow that kills the Colonel instantly. However, he has already done enough damage to Jake's pod before he dies. For this reason, human Jake is now awake but has trouble breathing and putting on a mask. Fortunately, Neytiri appears and helps him retrieve his mask. She then cradles human Jake and, for the first time, sees his actual body. Jake concludes his final video log by announcing that he's been selected to have his consciousness uploaded into an avatar. A ritual in which Jake is joined by Neytiri as his avatar form awakens serves as the film's climax.